Welcome to my studio, guys. I am Martin from MJ Hobby Corner. I will be your host today in this video, and welcome to the model corner. What better way to do a video than to be surrounded by 28mm miniatures? Yes, this is where it all started. So I figured I'd record today in the model corner. This area is really where the whole channel started. MJ Hobby Corner. Now it is the model corner. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about map making and the uses that I have for map making in my games. You're going to start to see more and more maps creeping into our games, especially when it comes to telling a narrative. In our two-player games, in our war games, we're going to use some maps to describe things. There may even be a sort of house-ruled map phase at the beginning of certain games to tell a story, like a mini campaign, right? So I want to show how I make those maps. And in this series, we concentrate on all kinds of scratch building. If you want to make figures out of hot glue, sure, come on down. Check it out. We can make figures out of hot glue. If you want to make figures out of Procreate clay and more standardized kind of sculpting figures, we can do that too. If you want to make figures out of tinfoil, sure, why not? Save you some money. You don't have money for clay? Well, let's make the figures out of something else. All of these things are talked about in Scratch Builder, and I have my foam section of the videos that my foam selection concentrates on making things out of foam that can then be used in our war games. Vehicles, starships, mechs, a whole variety of different things. All right, so that's what the Scratch Builder series is all about. And if you want to help support the channel, you can hop on over to War Games Vault. I have Scratch Builder monthly in written form, which is basically a companion to this series. And or if you just want to visit our Patreon, or just stay here and do all the little YouTube-y things, we appreciate you just the same. And now let's talk about maps. Here we are on one of my primary workshop benches, and I'm actually going to be utilizing this bench now in part for filming some of my one-shot RPGs. Already filmed one for our patrons, our Lords of Fantasy, as a test video, and so that's on Patreon. So we've already have one example of Easy D6 Play solo. So now I needed maps, and what we're going to do is I'm going to show you one of the techniques that I like to use for my maps. These are your typical coffee stained paper that gamers have used for so many years. This is nothing new, by the way. Gamers, if you've played D&D or whatever, you've probably done this many times yourself or continue to do this. So basically I took 4 sheets of printer paper. That's what I like. That's kind of the size range that I'm going for my maps right now. But I've made these much larger. I've made them smaller, and basically just stained them with coffee. You can use tea. So I have my map, and this is all hand drawn. We're going to see this in just a minute. But what I want to highlight is the technique that I use. So I have my magnetic whiteboard back there, and we're going to assemble the map on the magnetic board. Very simple setup. And then we have little magnetic markers that I'm going to show you, representing a variety of different things. You can see them all there, and I'll show you how I use these markers and how they provide information on the map. So let's get to it. So I'm going to set up my whiteboard, and I do have a way of, since Julie and I are going to be playing here, I do have a way of mounting my whiteboard so that it's not just leaning on something. So first things first, what I do is I take these are little magnets that I buy at Walmart, and I just paint them with a beige. It's like a warm buff color from Apple Barrel Paints, and paint them to match the map a little bit so they're not such an eyesore, right? And just put them on the corners. that mounts the map. And I actually have another one here for areas of the map that might be a little bit wrinkly or whatever. And they're pretty strong. I could probably use another one there. And then, so they're not such an eyesore, but they hold the map up quite nicely, okay? So there's my map mounted on the magnetic board. And now we can add things like villages, very simple drawings of villages, okay? And then put them, I have these little nodes. These are roads here. And then there's these little nodes that connect the roads, and those represent, it could represent a variety of different things, like crossroads, or it can also be a spot for mounting things like villages. So we have a village, we have this cool little castle keep here. So we're going to just put it somewhere, maybe here, a guard tower or something. Some of the roads are, we're going to look at this a little closer in just a minute. But we have some characters. So we have a character on a horse. So we'll put the character, say he's traveling here to a nearby village right there. We have caves, right? This is another marker. And a simple cave. We can put our cave somewhere in the mountains. Okay, so that's an area to travel to. There is also camps. So if our characters camp, let's say in a remote area, we can put the camp there. And basically, you know, we can move our character to various areas of the map. And of course, sometimes you have like, sometimes I like to flatten my map because they do get wrinkly. I think that's part of the endearment of using this system, the coffee system. Map does get a little bit wrinkly. But that's okay. You know, I like to flatten it. I didn't flatten this one yet. But so you got a few like wrinkle spots where if it's too wrinkly, the magnet is not going to stick. But for the most part, this is not bad at all. Okay, so he can visit the Staten Mountains. He can visit the Faywood, whatever it is. So these are all hand drawn. Now, this map in particular is going to be used for 5 Leagues in the Borderlands. Julie and I are playing a co-op game. If you haven't heard of 5 Leagues in the Borderlands, check it out. It is the sibling game of 5 Parsecs from Home from Mr. Ivan Sorensen. Excellent game. All his games are really good. And 5 Parsecs, and I'm playing that on Patreon as well. But Julie and I decided we're going to do a 5 Leagues game, and we needed a map. So this is where the whole system was born. It was for 5 Leagues in the Borderlands, and then I remembered, oh yes, RPGs. We can use this in our RPGs as well. So this map took me about 40 minutes to make. Really what takes the longest is letting your coffee dry. I put this out in the sun. It dried very quickly, actually. And one of the things I want you to note on the map is look at the shading that the coffee does. And actually, if you see these areas here that I made like this, those areas, it was actually tracing coffee. Some of the coffee stains that were left behind here, you can see them down here. Look at that. And this one I didn't even want to trace because they look so cool. It almost looks like part of a forest. And so this became the black thornwood. And these are all coffee stains. I only outlined some of this stuff with pencil, but the rest of it is coffee stains. So it's a really cool way of making a map. Okay. And then I added some mountains here, a little bit of rough shading. There's some lakes. And I gave names to everything because we're going to need that. But there's roads as well, these dotted lines. So this is one way of making a map. And I'm going to be designing many more maps. There's quite a few worlds that I want to make maps for. Quite a few games, and not only that, but they're great for you know, designing some fluff. I mean, it's just a way to get the geography out of your head and into paper. to be able to play. And again, if you guys are interested in seeing the handmade process of the maps, I can show that, you know, how I draw certain things or whatever. Like I said, these are not, I am no professional when it comes to that kind of stuff. You know, this is just something that will add some spice to our games in the future. And for role-playing, these are going to be key. Because like I said, when we role play, I want to have a world, and having this kind of modularity is going to be very helpful, so that when the characters visit certain towns, I'll have worksheets, little gaming worksheets that correspond to those towns, and we can, as we're playing, we could generate them on the spot with the oracles. So how do we use these maps? Well, in a role-playing game, as I just showed, we have, you know, we can mark all of the important areas. We can also mark, for example, where is there a boss? And I keep things very general. Here's my little boss marker. Very simple little dragon head. And so he's a boss, so obviously some kind of powerful boss. And I also have versions of characters on foot. It's just a little dude with a helmet. So if we look down here, these are all the little markers that I've made, and these take almost no time to make. I've made, like, in 20 minutes, I made half of these things, and I have more coming. And then we have these little bingo chips that I've magnetized, okay? And the bingo chips are used in another capacity. The bingo chips are used in our war games. Okay, so here is the new hand-drawn setup, and I haven't showed this one yet. Now, this one's geared towards wargaming. It could still be used in role-playing, too, of course. But this one's more geared towards wargaming. Now, here is a terrestrial landmass, and it's split up into parcels by using the roads themselves, and each parcel is numbered. Each parcel corresponds to a little note card that I have that gives me the terrain and you know, describes it a little bit. You know, is it a forested area? Is it a very wild area, a grassland, whatever? Then here we have a nice coastal region with the ocean. We have a bay. We have some little islands. By the way, those islands were formed by the coffee itself. I just traced the coffee. It's really cool. And then, you know, I added the little sea monster, all that cool stuff. And then we have a couple of naval fleets that are about to engage each other. Crap. I need ships. I need orc ships. I don't have orc ships. All right, let's go to the craft bench. Okay, so what that means now is I have a project to make some ships out of my usual recycled foam. This is an example of a ship from Uncharted Seas. We would probably use fantasy ships from Uncharted Seas. This is a dragon carrier for one of the factions. And then this is an example of one of those steam sail hybrid ships. I love these ships. They're just so interesting to me. And this is a fantasy ship, of course. So this would be one of the human flagships, maybe leading one of those fleets. But we need orc ships, you know? Now, I also have monitors, and these are made of wood, not of foam. These monitors could be used maybe in the mouth of the estuary that you saw over there, right? Some human monitors that are protecting the mouths of rivers and estuaries. All of that can be represented in a map. And we have a dwarven battleship, which I made. This one's a steam ironclad that I made some time ago. But again, no orc ships. So MJ, get busy. Start making some orc ships, because we have a cool naval tabletop battle coming with maps. So here's the deal. The red, just for purposes of this description, this is all, you know, this is not an actual game or whatever. The orcs are the red mark here. They've set up a very long front of many miles. Each one of these little bingo chips is a different force. So each chip is going to be numbered, okay? Some of these are already numbered, and some of them are not. I have to finish numbering some of these. But this one, number 2, This is a village, and so again, that number corresponds to a little note card if we need it. So this way we can identify this is town 1. We can identify something about that town, right? So the markers will have some information on them. So this is the orc front, and they're pushing into this territory here. These are the humans. The humans are arranged in an almost crescent-like position here with their forces, protecting most of the coastline. These are coastal forces. And then we have a garrison here. Now down here, we see that forces are already clashing. I have my little magnetized sword. These are so easy to make. And then just place it in there. Those forces, this represents a tabletop game. So once we move our forces on the map, right, and I have certain rules that we're going to be working on for the map, a very risk style, Risk board game. If you ever played Risk board game, this is inspired by that, okay? Once the forces move in, that represents a game. Now, again, when we have information about our parcel, that's going to give us information on how to set up our tabletop battle. Okay, and then the numbers on each of these little forces is going to tell us what army lists to use for the tabletop battle. Okay, so this will give us information, and it'll be cool. We'll have some kind of map phase before the game where things are played out on the map. We can add things like weather. I have a little weather gauge that I'm making with a very simple table to give us a little bit of interest in terms of weather. Or maybe it's, winter, and all of a sudden a blizzard kind of moves through and the forces are affected, the fighting is affected by that, right? But here, the orcs have acquired some ships. And so we have 2 fleets, Fleet A and Fleet B, which are now meeting. These are the humans. These are the orcs. This means that our tabletop battle is going to be a naval battle. So this is a system that we're going to incorporate into not all our games, but many of our games, starting in and around August. Julie and I have to do some test runs. There's going to be like a little map phase at the beginning of the game, and it could be a very simple map phase, like not an entire half of the video dedicated to the map, but definitely give information of what's going on geographically. Now here's the interesting thing about this system. We have a naval component and a terrestrial component. And so with the naval component, if Julie decides to move those ships, let's say she's playing humans, she would never play humans, she would be playing elves. Let's say her elf fleet moves down, touches one of my orc fleets, tabletop battle, naval. We would use the rules for Uncharted Seas because they're easy. I'm familiar with them. There are many rules out there for naval war games, but Uncharted Seas is not a bad rule set. We could also use a house-ruled version of Warfleet's FTL if we wanted to. That also worked very well. I did a few solo games of Warfleet's FTL, house-ruled for naval fleets, and it worked actually pretty good. But whichever way we go, we'll decide that later. We could use Uncharted Sea rules to determine the naval battle, and then whatever our favorite game rules to determine the terrestrial battle. So if we went the the one-page rules way, we could always play one-page rules regiments for the bigger battles on land, and then a house-ruled version of one-page rules war fleets, which then is geared towards the naval battles. We would like to introduce a few weather effects too. I mean, what would happen, if all of a sudden rainstorms made the roads really muddy, and we had a force that has artillery units that's trying to push these artillery units through that rain. It could also be, we could have little event cards that kind of mess us up, right? and all of a sudden your force maybe is harassed at night by vanguard forces, and suddenly you're entering the battle with a few less units than you were expecting to. You know, you're going in a little weaker because the enemy vanguard forces have harassed you. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, and maps are at the key of all this, and that's really the whole point. So, and again, if you guys are interested in seeing the handmade process of the maps, I can show that, you know, how I draw certain things or whatever. Like I said, these are not, I am no professional when it comes to that kind of stuff. You know, this is just something that will add some spice to our games in the future. And for role-playing, these are going to be key. Because like I said, when we role play, I want to have a world, and having this kind of modularity is going to be very helpful, so that when the characters visit certain towns, I'll have worksheets, little gaming worksheets that correspond to those towns, and we can, as we're playing, we could generate them on the spot with the oracles, you know. And so keeping these little markers vague is important in role-playing as well, because, you know, again, you're going to be generating the information as you play. You don't want to have too much already, you know, on the map. You want to leave things open for exploration, right? Open to exploration. So I also design space maps, and for space games, same thing. Instead of little villages and cities, we have little planets, worlds and star systems, and I can make the maps in many different scales. So if we want to do a map just to show the spiral arm of one of the galaxies that we're playing in, we can do that. And then the little markers can represent star systems. And then if we can zoom in and do a solar system instead, where we have like the different planets that make up that system, and which ones are habited, which ones are not. We make little starships and things like that. All of these things will find their way in the future into my games. So these maps, and of course, the worlds themselves, we can make terrestrial maps like these, and to simulate the world. So you have different scales that you can think about, and these scales can all be constructed. It can be worked into your maps. Yeah, so I am incorporating an article that talks about these maps. And then there is also a section on role-playing that's making its way into the magazine. And I'm developing that section more and more with every issue. So you will see a longer issue this time. And I'm going to be talking about Easy D6 Solo, which is the patrons have already seen that video. And as always, everything said in this video and everything expressed and demonstrated is my opinion only. It's the way that I like to play, and it's not the way to play. It's just what I like to do in my games, okay? So have fun, most importantly. That is the only rule that I do say should be universal, is no matter what you do with your games, with your hobby, have fun. If you're not having fun, then there's no point. Okay, so have fun. That's the main thing. All right, folks, have a good one, and I'll leave you with some images of Oathmark.